Yeah, I'm not convinced by this pick at all. And I think it's Kamala Harris's first big mistake. It's the biggest decision she's taken so far. And just don't agree that it's a balance to the ticket.
Tom Bevan. Well, let's welcome into the conversation on McDonald and Friends Democrat strategist Hillary Rosen. Hi, Hillary.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very well. And you're joining Rachel Cunliffe from the New Statesman and Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie as well. Hillary, is this an election-defining selection?
Well, it's Kamala Harris's first important decision, and so to that extent, it helps define her as a leader, and so it is important. I disagree with what Tom Bevan just said in terms of who Tim Walz is and who is supporting him. I mean, he has the full support of people like Senator Amy Klobuchar, one of the most moderate Democratic senators in the United States Senate from Minnesota. So I think we're going to learn a lot about Tim Walz over the next couple of days, but what we're not going to learn is that he's a left-wing crazy. He is thoughtful. He is what we call in the U.S. a progressive. So he is for free school lunches. He is for, he's very much for abortion rights. He is for government help with health care. Like, those are traditional Democratic positions, and he's got them. And I think that those are where the country is generally as well.
And so is there any risk here? Is this just a safe, bland choice for Kamala Harris?
I think it's a safe choice. I'm not sure it's a bland choice because he really is, he appeals to a moderate rural voter who maybe doesn't necessarily relate to a Kamala Harris from California. I think that he is going to bring something else to the ticket. What you want in a vice presidential candidate, which you don't really, we don't really have in the UK, is you want someone who is really going to be balancing a ticket and bringing to the table skills that the president doesn't have, so that they're complementary. And I think we'll see that with Tim Walz.
Tim, do you want to come in on this? Because I know you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by this pick at all. And I think it's Kamala Harris's first big mistake. It's the biggest decision she's taken so far. And just don't agree that it's a balance to the ticket. The problem Kamala has is that she's seen as a San Francisco, Californian liberal. And the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, is going to reinforce that idea. Now, Amy Klobuchar may back him, but of course she would. She's a senator from the same state, I think. Josh Shapiro was absolutely the governor of Pennsylvania. He's probably the most outstanding Democrat that I've seen in America at the moment. If Joe Biden hadn't have run and we'd had a really open Democratic primary process, I think he would have won, except for one thing. And I think this is why he's not been picked. He's a big supporter of Israel. And my concern, my worry is that Josh Shapiro, who would be governor of Pennsylvania, one of the most important swing states in the forthcoming US election, if he'd been picked as Kamala Harris's running mate, probably would have got Pennsylvania, I think it's 19 votes in the Electoral College, in the Democrat column, really would have tipped the race towards the Democrats. Why hasn't he been picked? Because the Democratic Party is not what it was. It's not your grandfather's party. It's not your father's party. It's become quite anti-Israel. There's large sections now of the Democratic Party on US campuses, university campuses in particular, who just support the Palestinian cause rather than the Israeli Jewish cause. And I think Josh Shapiro has been overlooked in favor for this Minnesota liberal because Kamala Harris wants to avoid that kind of potential civil war in her own party. I think it's a big mistake. I think it's an issue was to win. I think it's a bad sign for what America would do as leader of the free world.
Hillary?
Well, I just think that's nonsense, honestly, even though I respect you, Tim. I think, look, Kamala Harris...
Tell me why it's nonsense. Tell me why it's nonsense.
Kamala Harris's husband is Jewish. He is a strong supporter of Israel. They have been strong supporters of Israel. I do not think that will waver. Does that mean that the American people are moving very much the way that the rest of the world is, which is wanting a ceasefire, wanting a peaceful resolution here, looking for a two-state solution? I don't think that this is going to change. And look, I'm not going to put down Josh Shapiro. He's a great governor, and I would have been perfectly happy if he was picked. But the fact is that Tim Walz actually brings a lot to the ticket. He's a gun-toting, rural Minnesota guy who was born in Nebraska. He's a high school gym teacher. He, served in the military. He brings a lot to the ticket. So you can call him a traditional liberal, but I don't think voters are going to end up seeing him that way. I think voters are going to end up seeing a real guy with real experience and not an ideologue.
I also think that one of the things that he's proved very adept at is, while he might hold positions that some people, Tim, might say are far in the liberal progressive direction, he's able to communicate them in a way that's very humanizing, in a way that's very moderate. So, for example, reproductive rights, reproductive healthcare, huge issue in US politics. One state, Alabama, passing legislation that would effectively ban IVF. And he has talked personally about he and his wife seeking reproductive health care to help them have two beautiful children. And I think that is the kind of story that will resonate with lots of Americans who don't really want to get into the really sort of vitriolic, toxic nature of that particular debate, but kind of generally are pro-family and people making the best decisions for their family. If you contrast that with some of the things that J.D. Vance has said, which is, I think, that people who don't have children are, did he call them sociopathic?
Yeah,
deranged?
Like that, I think,
and getting into rows with people who have had really brutal battles with fertility. One of those positions, regardless of what you think of the policy itself, one of those positions sort of speaks to understanding and the very human struggles that people face. One of them is very shrill and ideological, and I think that's a factor as well.
Yeah. Hillary, in the time leading up to Walz's selection as Kamala Harris's running mate, he had first been quite an outspoken defender of Joe Biden after that disastrous debate performance, as the calls for the president to end his re-election bid really got louder. And when Biden did drop out, Walz then endorsed Kamala Harris the next day. And here he is now emerging as the nominee on the ticket with her. Now, in the UK, we would probably scathingly call that flip-flopping, and he'd be criticised for it. Has he faced criticism for his, apparently quite shallow support for Joe Biden at post-debate?
Look, I've been quite outspoken and on this program that about my disappointment with Joe Biden for a year. So I'm fully there. But, I think there were very few elected officials across the country who were willing to step out and ask the president publicly to step down. So I don't think people are going to hold that against him. I think that people are really moving on. I think the enthusiasm that we've seen for Kamala Harris has proven that people want to move on. Even, Donald Trump is struggling a little bit about how to move on because he was hoping to run against Joe Biden. But I do think that Joe Biden is just not going to be as big a factor in this campaign. And I think it's Kamala Harris's job, really, to make sure that she is presenting a vision for the future. Look, elections are about the future. They're not about the past. You can't run away from your record, but you can talk to people about what you want to do in the future. That's what they care about the most.
Hillary, thank you very much. Really good to speak to you. Thanks for your time.
All right, take care.
All the best. That's Democrat strategist Hillary Rosen. Is J.D. Vance Donald Trump's biggest mistake of this election campaign?
He follows me on Twitter.
J.D. Vance does?
J.D. Vance follows me
As
on
of
Twitter.
when?
So I regard him as a very wise...
Is that a recent development?
No, he's followed me for ages. I don't right know why, but he follows about 1,000 people, and one of them is me. So I think that's by far the most important thing we need to know about him. But actually, to be serious, neither of the candidates have chosen, I think, good running mates. Big question is, does it matter?
Yeah, that's right.
There is very little evidence that the person who is the vice presidential candidate really matters much in US politics. It matters a lot if the president gets elected and is ill or has to God forbid assassinated. But the evidence is cephalogically that a vice presidential candidate makes less than 1% difference. Now that matters, of course, if the race is close, but I think we spend an awful lot of time talking about this and probably too much. But J.D. Vance will not help the ticket. Tim Walz will not help the ticket. This is a race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Do you know what he did come up with, though, Tim Walz?
Oh, yeah, go on.
He came up with the weird
yeah.
accusation, saying of Donald Trump, he's just a strange, weird dude. And Democrats have been trying since 2016 to find an attack line on Trump that would work, and nothing really has. And I'm not saying that this will. I think everything is really up in the air in this election, and I certainly wouldn't want to bet on it. But I do think that certainly you've seen in the outrage that Republican conservatives have had about the suggestion that they're just a little bit weird shows that it's resonating in a way that other attack lines haven't been. And I think there is something a little bit weird about JD Vance. I mean, I feel like obsessing that much about other people's reproductive status, and I say that as somebody who believes that, as Tim does, that it would be really good if more people were having more children. But I think obsessing about it in that way and attributing blame towards it, I think there is something a bit weird about that.